London woke to the smell of smoke before dawn. At first, no one understood what was happening. In the cramped streets of the city, smoke was a familiar part of life. It drifted from hundreds of ovens, forges, and bakeries. But on the night of September 2nd, 1666, the smell was different. It was thick, acrid, and it filled the alleys far too quickly. Soon people saw a red glow rising above Pudding Lane. It seemed that a single house was burning. Within a few hours, it became clear. All of London was on fire. The fire began in the bakery of Thomas Farriner on Pudding Lane, not far from London Bridge. Later, the baker himself would claim that he had carefully extinguished the ovens before going to bed. Perhaps a spark remained in the ashes. Perhaps a smouldering log fell onto the firewood. No one ever established the exact cause. But around 1 o'clock in the morning, the fire broke out of the bakery and spread to the neighboring houses. At first glance, it did not look like a catastrophe. Fires happened in London all the time. Small blazes were almost part of everyday urban life. But the autumn of 1666 had been unusually dry. There had been almost no rain for several months. Wooden walls, beams, and roofs had dried out completely. On top of that, a strong easterly wind rose over the city that night. It caught the sparks and carried them through the narrow streets of the city. 17th century London was a perfect place for disaster. The city had grown too quickly. After the Civil War and the return of Charles II, the population of the capital was approaching 500,000. Most houses were still made of wood. Their upper floors jutted out over the streets so far that they sometimes almost touched each other. Narrow alleys ran between the houses, with hardly any light reaching them. Below were warehouses, shops, and workshops. They stored firewood, coal, oil, tar, cloth, alcohol, and gunpowder. Whole districts were quite literally built out of fuel.
Within just a few hours, the fire had engulfed dozens of houses. People ran into the streets in their nightclothes. Some tried to carry out furniture. Others dragged chests, documents, silver, and family heirlooms. Horses with carts got stuck in the narrow alleys. Panic grew faster than the fire itself. In those years, there was only one reliable way to stop a major fire: destroy several houses ahead of the flames and create an empty gap. Such firebreaks sometimes saved entire neighborhoods, but that required a quick decision, and the decision depended on the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. When he was awakened in the middle of the night and told about the fire, he at first did not believe it was so serious. According to one of the most famous versions, he said that even a woman could put out such a fire if she simply urinated on it. Perhaps the phrase was exaggerated later, but one thing is certain: Bloodworth delayed far too long in ordering houses to be demolished. He was afraid that the owners would demand compensation. As a result, precious hours were lost. By the morning of September 2nd, the fire could no longer be stopped by ordinary means. People passed buckets hand to hand. Soldiers and residents tried to pump water with hand engines, but the flames were too strong. The fire leapt across streets. The wind lifted burning splinters and pieces of wood into the air. They fell onto roofs dozens of meters ahead of the main front of the blaze. Sometimes a new fire broke out where people had not even yet seen the approaching flames. The events of those days were described in detail by Samuel Pepys, an official of the English Navy. His diary would later become one of the main sources on the Great Fire. On the morning of September 2nd, Pepys climbed a tower and saw that almost all of eastern London was already burning. In his words, people stood on the bank of the Thames and silently watched the houses burn. No one understood where it would all end. Pepys immediately went to the court of Charles II. The king was in Whitehall, and at first also did not grasp the scale of the disaster. But when Pepys explained that the fire was already getting out of control, Charles ordered houses to be demolished at once and troops to be used. The decision came too late, but it was precisely this order that later helped stop the fire. By the evening of the second day,
The fire was moving in several directions at once. It reached the Thames, destroying warehouses along the riverfront. Tar, oil, coal, ropes and spirits were stored there. When the storehouses caught fire, the blaze became even more terrifying. Columns of black smoke rose above the river. The heat was so intense that people on the opposite bank could feel it on their faces. Some eyewitnesses said that the fire seemed to move by itself. The flames did not simply rise upward, they twisted into enormous fiery whirlwinds. At times, the wind carried entire burning beams across the streets. In the darkness, it looked almost supernatural. Many were convinced that the city was being punished by God. For London at that time, such a thought seemed natural. A year before the fire, the city had endured another catastrophe, the Great Plague of 1665. Tens of thousands had died in London then. The streets still remembered burial carts and the red crosses painted on the doors of houses. When a fire began, a year after the plague, many concluded that it was a continuation of divine punishment. Preachers said that London had sunk too deeply into luxury, debauchery, and greed. Some recalled the Civil War and the execution of the king. Others believed that God was punishing England for the sins of its rulers. On the streets, pamphlets spread that called the fire a sign of the end times. But there were other explanations as well. England was then at war with France and the Dutch Republic. People in the city immediately began looking for enemies and spies.
Rumors spread through London that foreigners had started the fire. Crowds attacked Frenchmen, Dutchmen, and almost anyone who spoke with an accent. Several people were beaten nearly to death. One French watchmaker was almost hanged simply because he admitted that he had once said London might burn down. In reality, the authorities quickly realized that the rumors were more dangerous than any real conspiracy. Charles II tried to stop the panic. He personally appeared in the streets, directed the pulling down of houses, and urged people not to attack foreigners. For the king, this was an important moment. After the Civil War, the monarchy had not yet fully regained public trust. Now Charles wanted to show that he was capable of saving the city. Meanwhile, the fire kept moving toward the very heart of London. On the third day, it approached St. Paul's Cathedral. This was one of the most famous churches in England. The medieval cathedral was considered practically invulnerable. Many thought its thick stone walls would stop the fire. Inside, residents had taken shelter and brought in their belongings, furniture and merchandise. That decision proved fatal. Wooden scaffolding stood around the cathedral. It was being used to repair the building. When sparks landed on the scaffolding, it burst into flames almost instantly. The fire raced up the wooden structures and entered the cathedral. Soon, the books, paper, cloth, and furniture that people had brought inside also caught fire. On the night of September 4th, St. Paul's Cathedral turned into a gigantic furnace. The lead roof began to melt and run down the stone walls. According to eyewitnesses, streams of molten lead flowed through the streets. Massive stones cracked from the heat. When the dome collapsed, the sound was heard far beyond the city. Later, many would regard the destruction of the cathedral as the main symbol of the fire. If even St. Paul's could not stand, then nothing could.
By then, thousands of people were already leaving the city. They went out through the fields and roads to the north and west. Behind them stretched carts loaded with chests and the remains of their belongings. Those who had no money or horses carried everything themselves. Some simply sat on the ground and watched a gigantic cloud of fire rise above London. Samuel Pepys wrote that he had never seen anything more terrible in his life. According to him, at night, the city looked like a vast, burning arch. The reflections of the fire could be seen for many miles. Even sailors at the mouth of the Thames said they could see the red sky over London. Only on the evening of September 4th did the situation begin to change. The king ordered gunpowder to be used to blow up houses ahead of the fire. By then, no one was thinking about compensation or property anymore. Soldiers placed charges, blew up entire streets, and created wide, empty spaces. Gradually, the wind weakened. The fire lost its force. On the morning of September 5th, it became clear that the fire had finally been stopped. But what remained of London no longer looked like a city. The central part of the capital had turned into a vast field of ash, brick, and charred walls. The Great Fire destroyed around 13,000 houses, 87 churches, dozens of public buildings, and almost the entire old city. About 70,000 people were left homeless. That was nearly 1/6 of London's population. Astonishingly, the official death toll listed only a few people. The usual figure given is between 6 and 10. Most historians believe this is incorrect. In the 17th century, no one kept precise records of the poor and ordinary townspeople. Those who died in the flames could simply disappear without a trace. The heat was so intense that some bodies may have burned completely. The real number of dead was probably much higher. Almost immediately after the fire, the search for the guilty began.
In October 1666, a young French watchmaker, Robert Hubert, was executed. He confessed that he had set London on fire on behalf of England's enemies. But it soon became clear that his confession was impossible. When the fire began, Hubert was actually on a ship and had not yet arrived in England. Most likely, he was mentally ill or confessed under pressure. Despite this, he was still hanged. London needed someone to blame. A few years later, a new city began to rise on the site of the old one. Many architects dreamed of completely remaking London. The scholar and architect Christopher Wren proposed broad avenues, straight streets, and squares like those of Paris. Others wanted to turn London into a modern city of stone and brick. These plans were never fully carried out. Too many people demanded that their old plots of land be returned to them. But some things changed forever. After the fire, building wooden houses in central London was forbidden. New buildings had to be made of brick or stone. The streets were made wider. It was the first major urban planning transformation in the city's history. The most famous symbol of the new London once again became St. Paul's Cathedral. It was rebuilt by Christopher Wren. The new cathedral was completely different. Instead of a medieval structure, a huge dome rose above the city. That silhouette would later become one of the defining symbols of London. But the memory of the fire did not disappear. In the 1670s, the monument was erected in the center of the city, a tall column near the place where the fire had begun. An inscription on it declared that the fire had been caused by the treachery and malice of the papists. Even years later, the city was still looking for someone to blame. Only in the 19th century was that inscription removed. By then, it had become clear that the fire was not part of any conspiracy. It had begun by accident. But in 17th century London, an accident proved more terrible than any plan. Today, only a few traces still recall the Great Fire. The narrow streets of the city follow much the same lines as they did before 1666. The monument still stands near Pudding Lane, and if you climb to its top, you can see almost all of modern London. It is hard to believe that it was here that a city of wood, smoke, and narrow alleys once stood, a city that vanished in fire in just 4 days. And yet the Great Fire destroyed not only old London, in a sense, it saved it. After plague, war, and chaos, the city was given a chance to begin again. Out of the ashes emerged another capital, stronger, richer, and more modern. But one strange detail remains in the story. The bakery on Pudding Lane, where it all began, disappeared together with the rest of the district. No one will ever know whether the cause was a single spark, an oven not properly put out, or simple human error. One small fire in the darkness proved strong enough to change the fate of an entire empire.